My name is Amelia Hayes. I'm 35 years old, and I never imagined my own family could wound me so deeply. It was a lesson that arrived not like a sudden storm, but like a slow, creeping frost, numbing my heart long before it finally shattered. The story of that shattering, however, begins with the scent of sawdust and the weight of unspoken expectations. Growing up in Crestwood Bay, a city cradled by the misty shores of the Pacific Northwest, my life was always lived in the shadow of my family's legacy. My father, Julian Hayes, was a master craftsman, the quiet genius behind Hayes Artisans. Our family name was synonymous with heirloom-quality furniture, pieces of oak and walnut that spoke of time, patience, and a deep respect for nature. My mother, Catherine, was the face of the business, charming, elegant, and fiercely protective of the Hayes reputation. And then there was Sophie, my younger sister. Where I was the quiet grain of the wood, she was the brilliant, polished veneer. Sophie lived her life through a lens, a rising lifestyle influencer whose world was a curated gallery of sun-drenched brunches, boutique hotel stays, and effortless beauty. To our parents, she was not just a daughter, she was a brand, a modern extension of the Hayes legacy they so cherished. I, on the other hand, was the dependable one, the steady, unseen support beam. I ran my own small graphic design business from my quiet apartment overlooking the harbor, creating logos and websites for small, ethical businesses. My life was calm, ordered, and, in their eyes, profoundly unremarkable. For years, I had been the family's silent investor. Whenever Hayes Artisans hit a rough patch, a hushed phone call from my father would follow. Just a bit of a cash flow issue, Mia, he'd murmur, and I, eager for his approval, for a sense of belonging, would transfer the funds. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Over the years, it had amounted to nearly $50,000, my life savings poured into the foundation of a house where I was beginning to feel like a guest. The fault lines began to show more clearly in the months leading up to Sophie's wedding. It was to be the social event of the Crestwood Bay season, a testament to her impeccable taste and our family's standing. The planning consumed our lives. I tried to be involved, suggesting a local harpist I knew or a caterer who specialized in seasonal, farm-to-table fare. Mia, darling, this isn't a farmer's market, Sophie would say, not with malice, but with a breezy dismissal that stung more than any insult. She'd be scrolling through her phone, showing my mother swatches of imported silk or photos of orchids flown in from Hawaii. Sophie has a vision, my mother would add, her smile tight. We must trust her vision. I learned to bite my tongue, to retreat into the quiet corners of family gatherings, telling myself that my support was what mattered. I just wanted us to feel like a family, not a board of directors managing the brand of Sophie Hayes. The summer before the wedding, at my father's 65th birthday party, the chasm between us felt a mile wide. The party was held in the sprawling garden of their home, the air thick with the scent of roses and damp earth. Sophie arrived fashionably late, a vision in cream linen, her fiancé, a handsome and equally well-curated tech investor, in tow. She spent the evening taking artful photos of cocktails and candids of laughing guests, narrating the event for her thousands of followers. I tried to talk to my father about a new marketing strategy I'd designed for Hayes Artisans, an idea to modernize their online presence. He was distracted, pacing near the edge of the patio, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, anxious rumble about a supplier contract. My mother was flitting around Sophie, refilling her champagne flute, her pride a tangible thing. Isn't she just radiant? She whispered to a neighbor, gesturing to Sophie. I stood there, holding a glass of wine that had grown warm in my hand, feeling utterly invisible. I was a silent benefactor, a background character in the brightly lit story of their lives. The final warning sign came 2 weeks before the wedding. My mother called, her voice strained with a manufactured lightness. Mia, darling, we've had a few unexpected expenses with the florals. Sophie has her heart set on a particular type of cascading orchid. There was a pause. We were hoping you could help. Another $15,000 should cover it. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. $15,000. On top of the 50 I'd already given. For flowers. I looked around my modest apartment, at the furniture I'd bought secondhand, the vacation I'd postponed for the third year in a row. For the first time, a quiet but firm no rose in my throat. "Mom, I can't," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've given so much already. I just don't have it." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and cold. "I see," my mother said, her tone clipped. "Well, Sophie will be very disappointed." Sophie called an hour later. There was no pretense of sweetness. "I heard you weren't willing to help the family, Mia," she said, her voice like ice. "Fine. But don't expect a warm welcome at the wedding." The line went dead. I told myself it was an empty threat, a flash of bridal stress. But a seed of dread had been planted, and in the coming days, it would grow into a suffocating vine. I had spent weeks searching for the perfect dress, a deep forest green silk gown that cost me $600. I had it altered to fit perfectly, imagining myself standing beside her, a real sister on her most important day. I clung to that image, a fragile shield against the encroaching chill. The day of Sophie's wedding dawned gray and misty, a typical Crestwood Bay morning. The sky wept a fine drizzle onto the city, but I woke with a nervous flutter of hope. Today, I thought, could be different. Today, the performance would end, and we could just be a family. The ceremony was at the Edgewater Grand, a historic hotel whose windows looked out over the churning gray waters of the Sound. Its old-world elegance was the perfect backdrop for Sophie's aesthetic. As I drove, my palms were slick on the steering wheel. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and smoothed down my silk dress. My reflection in the car window was a stranger, poised, elegant, and terrified. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor of the lobby as I approached the grand ballroom entrance. A man in a sharp tuxedo stood at a velvet rope, a tablet in his hand. "Good afternoon," I said, my smile feeling brittle. "I'm Amelia Hayes, the bride's sister." He tapped at his screen, his brow furrowing slightly. "Hayes? I don't see an Amelia." Just then, my father stepped out from the doorway. He was dressed in a tailored tuxedo, but his face was a mask of grim resignation. My mother stood just behind him, her arms crossed, her expression as hard and unyielding as the granite pillars of the hotel. "Amelia," my father said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "You're not on the guest list." The world seemed to slow down. The soft murmur of the arriving guests, the distant strains of a string quartet, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. "What?" "Dad, there must be a mistake. I RSVP'd." My voice was a thin, wavering thread. I glanced past them into the warm, flower-filled ballroom. And I saw her. Sophie. Standing near an opulent archway of the very orchids I had refused to fund. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking directly at me. And she was smirking. It was not a triumphant, theatrical smirk, but a small, chillingly satisfied curve of her lips. It was the smirk of a queen who had just effortlessly swept an inconvenient pawn from the board. The guests nearest the entrance had fallen silent. Phones, like small, dark eyes, began to light up, their lenses trained on my humiliation. A woman in a feathered fascinator whispered to her companion, her words just loud enough to carry. "Is that her sister? The one who?" My cheeks burned. I felt stripped bare, every insecurity I'd ever had about not being enough, not fitting in, laid out for public display. "Mom?" I pleaded, turning to her. "This is Sophie's day, Amelia," she said, her voice final. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "We can't have any drama." The guard, taking his cue, gave a slight shrug. "Sorry, ma'am. Name's not on the list." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to hold up a ledger of every dollar, every hour, every piece of my heart I had poured into them. But my throat was sealed shut. I thought of my best friend, Leo, who had warned me just a week before over coffee. "Be careful, Mia," he'd said gently. "They take you for granted. Don't let them break your heart." I had brushed him off. "It's a wedding, Leo. It'll be fine." Now his words echoed in the hollow space where my hope had been. This wasn't a mistake. This was a punishment. A calculated, public execution of my place in the family. I took a single, ragged breath. I squared my shoulders, the silk of my expensive dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a part one had failed to land. Without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, each step deliberate, my head held high as I passed the whispering guests and the silent judgment of my parents. The sound of their muffled laughter as I reached the lobby doors was the final, twisting turn of the knife. When I got home, I didn't take off the dress. I sat on my sofa, the forest green silk pooling around me, and stared out at the rain-streaked harbor. The notifications on my phone began to buzz. A friend had texted a screenshot from a local gossip blog's Instagram story. It was a blurry photo of me walking away, with the caption, "Drama at the Hayes wedding? Unidentified woman, a sister, turned away at the door." The pain was no longer a sharp sting but a deep, crushing weight. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the premeditation. The cruelty. They hadn't just closed a door, they had slammed it in my face in front of the whole world, and then posed for pictures inside. I thought about calling Leo, but I couldn't speak. I simply texted him, "You were right." His reply came instantly. "I'm on my way." As I waited, I finally allowed the tears to fall, silent tracks on my cheeks. I had given them my savings, my time, my unwavering loyalty. I had tried to be the daughter they wanted, the sister Sophie needed. But in the end, my worth had a price tag. And when I refused to pay, I was discarded. The frost that had been creeping into my heart had finally frozen it solid. I didn't know what lay ahead, but as Leo's footsteps sounded in the hallway, I knew one thing for certain. I could not, and would not, ever be that vulnerable again. The morning after the wedding, I woke to a world that felt muted and gray, the Crestwood Bay drizzle a perfect reflection of my soul. The green silk gown was a crumpled heap on a chair, a sad relic of a hope I now saw as foolish. I had silenced my phone, unable to face the tide of pity, curiosity, and morbid fascination I knew was waiting. The silence, however, was its own kind of noise, amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. When I finally braved the digital world, it was worse than I had imagined. Sophie, from a sun lounger on her honeymoon in Bali, had already begun her campaign of damage control. Her Instagram was a masterpiece of strategic vulnerability. A photo of her hand, adorned with its new diamond ring, resting on her husband's. The caption read, "Sometimes family is complicated, but I'm choosing to focus on love and light." So grateful for this new chapter. The comments were a battlefield. Her loyal followers rushed to her defense. "Rise above the negativity, queen, and don't let anyone dim your sparkle." But a few dissenting voices had broken through. "What about what you did to your sister?" one asked. Another, "Classy move, turning your own family away." Sophie, a master curator, simply ignored them. Local gossip sites had run with the story. Hayes' wedding vexation. Influencer's sister shunned. They used the same blurry photo of me walking away, my posture a study in defeat. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, my deepest wound now a topic for public debate. Work was impossible. I sent a vague email to my clients about a family emergency, pushing back deadlines. I couldn't bear the thought of a video call, of seeing the pity in their eyes. A text came through from a fellow designer. "Mia, I saw the blog post. That's horrific. Thinking of you." I appreciated the sentiment, but each message felt like another grain of salt in the wound. My parents' calls went straight to voicemail. My father's message was weary. "Amelia, we should talk about this. It's getting out of hand." My mother's was sharp and accusatory. "You need to call us back, Amelia. You have no idea the position you've put us in." Their concern wasn't for me, it was for the pristine Hayes reputation, now tarnished by whispers of cruelty. Driven by a cold, nagging suspicion, I sat down at my laptop. For years, I had access to the Hayes Artisans Family Fund account, the one into which I had poured my $50,000. I rarely checked it, trusting my father's stewardship. Now, that trust felt like another casualty of the wedding. I logged in, my fingers stiff. The balance loaded. My breath hitched. The account was almost empty. I scrolled through the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 weeks ago, just before my mother's call about the orchids, there was a single, massive withdrawal. $75,000. Transferred to an entity named Elysian Event Planners. A quick search confirmed my fears. Elysian Event Planners was one of the most exclusive, high-end wedding planning firms in the Northwest. They were the architects of Sophie's vision. They hadn't just used family money. They had drained the account, taking every last cent of my $50,000 investment along with it to pay for the very party from which they had barred me. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Their desperation, my refusal to contribute more, their swift and brutal punishment. It wasn't just spite, it was a cover-up. They needed my $15,000 because they had already spent my $50,000. A rage cold and clean burned through the fog of my grief. This was no longer just a story of emotional betrayal. It was theft. I called my father. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight. "Amelia." $75,000, Dad, I said, my voice dangerously calm. "To Elysian Event Planners. You used my $50,000 to pay for her wedding and then turned me away when I wouldn't give you more." There was a long, heavy silence. Then, a defeated sigh. "It was more complicated than that, Mia. The business. We had to keep up appearances. The wedding, it was important for Sophie's brand, for all of us. For all of you," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You stole my life savings to protect your image." "We'll pay you back," he mumbled, the promise as hollow as his excuses. "When things turn around." He hung up before I could reply. My confrontation with my mother was even worse. She didn't deny it. "You have a good job, Amelia," she said, her voice brittle. "You can earn more money. Sophie only gets one wedding day. A family makes sacrifices for each other. A family doesn't steal from each other and then humiliate them," I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped, and the line went dead. I sat back, the phone slipping from my hand. The isolation felt absolute. They had circled the wagons, and I was on the outside, not just emotionally, but financially stripped bare by their choices. That evening, Leo came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just listened as I laid out the whole sordid story. The $75,000 withdrawal, the wedding planners, my parents' chilling justifications. When I finished, he looked at me, his expression serious. "Mia, this is beyond a family squabble. They committed fraud." His words, stark and legal, cut through the emotional haze. He was right. I had been thinking in terms of hurt and betrayal, but this was something tangible, something I could fight. "What do I do?" I whispered. "You stop letting them write the story," he said, his voice firm. "You find a lawyer. You get your money back. And you reclaim your life from them." A flicker of something I hadn't felt in days, resolve, ignited within me. They had taken my trust, my money, and my place in the family. They had made me the villain in their narrative. But the story wasn't over. And for the first time, I felt ready to pick up the pen and write the next chapter myself. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about getting my self-respect back. A few days later, a news alert on my phone sent a fresh shockwave through my already fractured world. The headline in the Crestwood Bay Chronicle read, "Hayes Artisans files for bankruptcy amidst mounting debt." The article detailed years of financial mismanagement, a failed expansion, and a number of disgruntled creditors. My parents' carefully constructed facade had not just cracked, it had crumbled into dust for the entire city to see. My $50,000 hadn't been a lifeline, it had been a final, desperate gasp before the inevitable drowning. I sat in my apartment, the gray light of the harbor outside my window, and felt a strange, cold vindication. Their public downfall was the external manifestation of the private rot I had only just discovered. That same afternoon, a letter arrived, slipped under my door. My mother's elegant cursive, now shaky and desperate. "Amelia, I know you're angry. But we're losing everything. The house, the business, everything Dad built. Please, don't turn your back on us now. We need you." I placed the letter on my coffee table, the paper feeling toxic to the touch. Her plea for unity now, after they had so decisively cast me out, was galling. Armed with a new, steelier resolve, I met with the lawyer Leo had recommended. Miss Sterling was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I laid out the entire story, spreading bank statements and the printout from the Elysian Event Planner's website across her polished desk. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the statement showing the $75,000 withdrawal. The bankruptcy filing is a double-edged sword, she explained. It means their assets are frozen, but it also forces a complete, transparent audit of their finances. Your claim is not just valid, it's now a key piece of the bankruptcy proceedings. We can file a formal claim for restitution of your $50,000 as a creditor. Filing a claim. The words felt momentous, a declaration of war against the people who shared my blood. But what other choice did I have? That evening, I drove to my parents' house. I needed to see them, to look them in the eye one last time before I crossed this final bridge. The house, once a symbol of warmth and stability, felt cold and hollow. The scent of sawdust was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of defeat. My father sat at the grand dining room table, the one he'd built with his own hands 30 years ago. He was surrounded by stacks of ominous-looking legal documents, his shoulders slumped. "The business is gone, Mia," he said, his voice raspy. "They're going to take the house." "You knew this was coming," I said, my voice flat. "You knew when you took my money." He flinched. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine shame in his eyes. We thought we could pull it out. One last big project. But it fell through. He finally looked at me, his gaze pleading. "Your mother, she couldn't bear the thought of the humiliation. The wedding had to be perfect. It was a distraction. A final performance. A performance paid for with my life savings," I said, the words hanging in the air between us. He had no answer. His silence was the only confession I would ever get. Sophie, meanwhile, was silent online. Her vibrant, aspirational feed had gone dark. The bankruptcy of her family's legacy brand was a stain her curated world couldn't filter away. Her sponsors were likely pulling out, her carefully built empire of influence crumbling alongside the real one. I left my parents' house and drove, aimlessly, along the coast. The churning sea seemed to mirror the storm inside me. Miss Sterling's words echoed in my mind. A formal claim. My mother's letter lay on my passenger seat. "We need you." My father's broken face was seared into my memory. A final performance. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, the wind whipping my hair. For so long, my identity had been tangled up with theirs. I was the reliable daughter, the quiet sister, the financial safety net. I had played my part in their performance for years, hoping that one day they would see me. But they never had. And they never would. Looking out at the vast, indifferent ocean, I realized that my loyalty had been a cage. Their bankruptcy wasn't just the end of their business, it was the key to my freedom. I picked up my phone and called Miss Sterling. "File the claim," I said, my voice clear and steady against the roar of the wind. "File it today." The weeks leading up to the bankruptcy hearing were a tense limbo. My claim for $50,000 was now officially part of the court record, a stark testament to my family's betrayal. They responded through their lawyer with a lowball settlement offer, $10,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. It was an insult, a clear attempt to buy my silence. Ms. Sterling advised we reject it immediately. "They're scared, Amelia," she said. "The audit is uncovering more than they wanted." The day of the first hearing, I walked into the Crestwood Bay Courthouse, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. My parents and Sophie were already there, sitting on a bench across the wide, marble hall. They looked smaller, diminished under the harsh fluorescent lights. My mother clutched a handkerchief, my father stared blankly at the floor, and Sophie, hidden behind oversized sunglasses, was furiously tapping on her phone. They didn't look at me. It was as if I were a ghost, haunting the ruins of their lives. Inside the courtroom, a new player emerged. A woman named Ms. Rowan, a prim, middle-aged accountant, was called to the stand by the creditor's attorney. She had been the bookkeeper for Hayes Artisans for over a decade before. As she put it, she resigned due to ethical concerns. Her testimony was the nail in my family's coffin. With methodical precision, She detailed years of financial sleight of hand. My father wasn't just a poor businessman. He had been moving money between accounts, using client deposits to cover personal expenses and fund Sophie's burgeoning influencer career, sponsoring her trips, paying for her designer wardrobe, all under the guise of marketing expenses. The $50,000 investment from Ms. Amelia Hayes, Ms. Rowan stated, looking at her records, was not treated as a loan or an investment. It was deposited into a general family fund and was almost immediately used to pay off overdue personal credit cards and, ultimately, to fund a significant portion of the $75,000 payment to Elysian event planners. The courtroom was silent. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was worse than I thought. My money hadn't been a last-ditch effort to save the business. It had been their personal slush fund for years. After the hearing, Ms. Rowan approached me in the hallway. Her expression was not unkind. "I kept copies of everything," she said quietly, handing me a small flash drive. "Your parents, they hurt a lot of people. Not just you. I thought you deserved to see the whole truth." That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was a labyrinth of spreadsheets and hidden ledgers, a meticulous record of their deceit. I saw payments for Sophie's apartment security deposit, for my mother's luxury car lease, for my father's golf club membership. All of it obfuscated, hidden, paid for by the sweat of his craftsmen and the trust of his daughter. The flash drive wasn't just evidence, it was an absolution. It freed me from any lingering guilt, any shred of doubt that I was doing the right thing. The final court date arrived. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had clearly read every page of the auditor's report and Ms. Rowan's ledgers, delivered her ruling. The bankruptcy was approved, and the assets of Hayes Artisans were to be liquidated. As a creditor with a clear case of fraudulent misappropriation, my claim was given priority. The court ordered that once the house was sold, I was to be reimbursed $40,000 from the proceeds, not the full $50,000, but a significant, public validation of my claim. The legal victory felt hollow. There was no joy, only a profound sense of exhaustion. I had won, but I had lost the last vestiges of the family I once knew. A week later, I found Sophie waiting for me outside my favorite coffee shop. She looked nothing like the polished influencer from Instagram. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy, and she was wearing a simple gray sweatshirt. "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice small. We sat at a small table by the window. For a long time, she just stirred her tea. "I'm sorry, Mia," she finally whispered, not looking at me. I was so wrapped up in my own world. The pressure, the followers. I thought the wedding had to be perfect to prove I was successful. I didn't think about what it was costing you. I listened, my heart a still, quiet place. It was an apology of a sort. But it was years too late. "It wasn't just the money, Sophie," I said softly. "You stood there. You watched them turn me away. You smirked." Tears finally welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "I know," she choked out. "I was cruel. I was so scared of everything falling apart that I pushed away the one person who was actually holding it all together. And now it's all gone anyway." I looked at my sister, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time without the filter of resentment or longing. I saw a young woman who had built her entire identity on a foundation of sand, who was now lost in the wreckage. I felt a pang, not of anger, but of a distant, sad pity. I reached across the table and, for the first time in years, I took her hand. It felt small and cold in mine. "I hope you find a way to build something real, Sophie," I said. "Something that's just for you, not for an audience." I stood up to leave. "Mia, wait," she said, looking up at me, her eyes full of a desperate hope. Can we start over?" I gave her a gentle, sad smile. "I don't think so," I said, my voice kind but firm. "I have to start over too. And I have to do it on my own." I walked out of the coffee shop and into the crisp autumn air. The legal battle was over. The family I had fought so hard to belong to was gone. But as I walked toward the harbor, the sun breaking through the clouds and glinting off the water, I didn't feel loss. I felt a quiet, expansive sense of peace. I had lost my inheritance, my childhood home, my sister, and my parents. But in the process, I had found something far more valuable, My own voice, my own strength, and the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I was no longer the silent support beam. I was the architect of my own life, and the foundation was finally, blessedly, solid ground.